Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the zoo. We're filming episode 2 now. What is open-mindedness, and can someone be a skeptic and be open-minded? So today I have Ozzy with me, and we're just going to have a chit-chat back and forth and see where we can come to an agreement on this. So Ozzy, what do you think about what is open-mindedness? What it means to be open-minded?
Well, obviously, it's considered a virtue. It's a compliment that to pay someone. When you say someone is open-mindedness, you're flattering them, or you're at least sincerely paying them a compliment, I hope, as opposed to closed-minded, which is obviously a kind of insult. No one wants to be called closed-minded, and presumably no one wants to be closed-minded. But to answer the question, what is open-mindedness, in my view, it helps to understand how it's often talked about. And because I think the way people talk about it is often misleading, and it leads people to certain wrong conclusions about what open-mindedness is.
Because people would say it's like, for example, someone would be open-minded if they were speaking to, let's say, like a flat earther, right? And they were presenting their reasons for believing in flat earth, or, whatever evidence they know of for flat earth. And you'd be open-minded, some people would say, if you were willing to change your mind on the shape of the earth,
Yeah, well, that's the perfect way of expressing it, actually. Willing to change your mind. A lot of people think that open-mindedness consists of a willingness to change your mind, right? Or a willingness to have your mind changed. And I don't think that's correct, actually. And it might seem a little paradoxical to say that because we're so used to hearing that expression, I'm willing to change my mind on this. And I mean, that's an expression I use all the time myself. But I don't think that open-mindedness consists of a willingness to change one's mind. And one of the reasons I don't think that it's that is, well, first of all, I don't think that we decide what we believe. I don't subscribe to doxastic voluntarism. Doxastic voluntarism is the view that one can, by an act of will, decide what to believe. I mean, I'm an atheist. I don't think there are any gods. I think they're all fictions. If someone said, well, Ozzy, go ahead and, decide to believe in God. I can't will myself. I could mouth the words. I could profess a belief in God, but I can't just profess not to believe, or to believe it when I don't. And similarly, I think a devout believer in God, or a devout believer in Bigfoot or something like that, can't suddenly pretend that they think those things are false when they in fact think they're true. They can't just through an act of will decide to do that. So I think that we don't decide our beliefs. Our beliefs happen to us, and rather helplessly. And when you think something is true, right, what that means is that you think something is the case. And when I think something is the case, why would I want to change my mind about it? Why would I be willing to change my mind, right? Even if I've changed my mind in the past and I realize I could be wrong again, and one of the beliefs I have right now is that I've been wrong in the past. I'll be wrong again about something in my belief set now. But I'm not willing, certainly not eager, to change my mind. Why would I want to change my mind about the things that I presently think are true? I mean, if I think they're true and I'm willing to change my mind, it would mean that I'm willing to change my mind about something that I think is true, such that I would come to falsely believe that it's false when it is, in fact, by my lights right now, still true. So I don't think that actually people need to worry about being willing to change their minds. I don't think that open-mindedness is an act of will. It's not an act at all. It's not volitional. I think that open-mindedness is rather not a desire or a willingness or a mental act of wanting or being willing to change your mind, or even being willing to listen to an argument or another position. I think that open-mindedness consists of a capacity. It's a skill set that you have. It's a capacity to have your beliefs revised and updated in accordance with the norms of reason, right? According to the standards of good reason and good evidence, right? If a person just changes his or her mind willy-nilly for no good reason, we don't think of them as open-minded, right? You wouldn't compliment a person and say, oh, you're so open-minded because they changed their mind like they changed their underwear, right? We've all probably met people like that. I have some family members, some in-laws, for instance, who are kind of new agey and believe in all kinds of twaddle, and they'll believe one conspiracy one day, and then they'll believe a completely different conspiracy theory the next day that contradicts what they were believing the day before, and they'll believe one piece of new age twaddle one day and then another one after that, and they'll just bounce around. as soon as they hear something that strikes them as reasonable, whether or not they have good reasons, whether or not they've thought out the reasons at all, if it just seems attractive to them, if it fits well with what they already believe, they take it on board. And that I don't think anyone would call open-mindedness, right? And now those people are all too willing, all too eager to change their minds. They have no problem changing their minds. They're not particularly wedded to their beliefs. But by contrast, I've known people who've been very, 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 very strongly wedded to a belief and yet changed their mind. They weren't willing to change their mind. They resisted changing their mind. They had to have a lot of good arguments and good reasons slowly erode and corrode their position until finally they said, you know what? This thing that I believe very strongly, it doesn't make sense, it doesn't hold up, and I'm abandoning it, right? That, I think, is what open-mindedness is a capacity to let good reasons and good arguments and good evidence revise your belief set, right? But what that means is that you have to have already on board a capacity to distinguish good reasons and good evidence. You have to understand what a good argument is. You have to have a set of critical thinking tools. And so in my view, if you don't have a good set of critical thinking tools, you're not even a candidate for being open-minded. You might just be a candidate for someone who changes his or her mind. But I don't think that makes you open-minded. And similarly, people shouldn't be called closed-minded just because they don't change their minds often, because there are a lot of people who have thought long and hard about their positions, have marshaled really good evidence in support of their beliefs. Those beliefs are sort of well hooked into a consistent set of beliefs within their belief set, and they're holding on to them because they have excellent reasons to. And they might say to you, well, I'm not willing to change my mind. But that doesn't mean that it won't, that nothing could change their mind. For instance, I've had beliefs, practically everything I think about philosophy and epistemology and moral philosophy and aesthetics and metaphysics. I mean, practically and philosophy of mind, philosophy of language, practically every belief I presently hold, I used to not hold, right? I used to hold a different belief, right? And some of the beliefs that I presently hold, I fought against mightily. I didn't want to believe these things. I thought I had the truth in hand, or at least I thought I had a better version of the question, a better handle on the question than I do now. And I didn't want to change my mind, but my mind was changed. I wasn't willing to. So I don't think willingness has anything to do with it. So I think being willing to change your mind really isn't an ingredient in being open-minded. I think open-mindedness simply consists of an amenability to reasons and evidence. And if your mind works that way, if you have trained your mind that way, if you have had good models of critical thinking and you've taken those on board and you've absorbed those lessons, and that's how your mind works, then you're open-minded. Even if you don't change your mind very often. And you're not open-minded just because you do change your mind, because you might be changing your mind for all the wrong reasons. So that's how I see the matter.
And I just wanted to welcome Saka. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, not bad. So we just started, and we're just going down what we believe constitutes open-mindedness. So what are your thoughts?
So I agree with Ozzy on a lot of it, except for the one, I think one of the main parts that he's trying to put out, like at the end there, which is the idea that willingness isn't required for open-mindedness. And I think that it is that you could have somebody that holds a position that you'd have to, and they might be very reluctant or unwilling to change that position, and you can browbeat them for long enough that that eventually they're going to shift their position. They're going to realize that there's no good reason for them to hold that position, and I think that that unwillingness right there is an example of somebody who wouldn't be open-minded. I think that when you talk about something that's open-minded, is that the first thing that they do is they have to be not just critical of the information that they're being presented or the arguments that they're being presented, but of their own position as well. And if they can realize the same reasons why they might or reject someone else's claim, they have to be consistent in applying that same standard, those same rules to the things that they believe as well. And I think if that's the case, then they realize through their kind of own introspective viewpoint of what they do believe, they can realize that maybe they don't have good reason to believe things themselves, and go out and seek what maybe a better position is, whether or not they have good reason to hold to the position they have, whether there's a better position they could have, or whether it just makes more sense to be agnostic on a position.
Can I ask you a question, Saka, about that?
Sure.
When you say like a person has to be willing to change their mind or willing to listen to the arguments or something like that, what does it mean for them to be willing to change their mind? I mean, what could that mean?
I think that the idea is that when you approach some people that have such dogmatic views about things, that no amount of they believe, first off, that no new evidence will allow them to shift their position. If that is the position that someone's coming at, that their starting position, then I think that by very definition that's somebody who is not open-minded.
Okay, okay. I think though that you might be agreeing with me there on the actual bone of contention between us. Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay.
Okay.
When you say that the person cannot have their mind changed because of good reasons and evidence, presumably it's because they're not impressed with those reasons and evidence that you're putting forward, right? It doesn't strike them as good reasons and evidence, right? They might have something in their belief set, it might be completely stupid, or it might actually be a good reason that undermines the things that you're saying, such that what you're putting forward doesn't strike them as good reasons and evidence, right? So as I see it, the way you're unpacking the willingness to change your mind just amounts to a capacity to evaluate arguments for a position or against a position, in accordance with the norms of good reasoning.
Well, it's not just the capacity. And I think a good example of this is when you get into people, like discussions with people that are very like anti-evolution. They could be in a room with a PhD biologist, and they could be presented all this information, but they already have their conclusion in mind. They have the capacity. The capacity would be there if they accepted first off that they could be wrong, and at that point in time, that would be where the open-mindedness would be. They accept that they're wrong, and then they're willing to learn. Or they're not necessarily that they accept that they're wrong, but they accept that they could be wrong. And I think that a lot of people approach these conversations without even getting to that first step, where they can't even. It is a weakness in their position to even acknowledge the thought that they could be wrong about something.
Right, but if that's their position, if their position is that X is true, and it's also their position that they couldn't be mistaken about X, whatever X is, right? Then why should they be willing to change their mind, right? I mean, they shouldn't. I mean, given what it is they believe, they have no good reason for thinking that, right? Now, you might be able to appeal to them and say, well, look, you've had similar beliefs in the past where you were convinced you couldn't be mistaken, and you decided that you were mistaken. Could not happen again. So you could try to reason them to realize that what they take to be a reason why they shouldn't revise their beliefs is actually not a good reason not to revise their beliefs. But if a person has by their lights excellent reasons not to revise their belief, then they shouldn't be willing to revise their beliefs. And I would submit it doesn't make a lot of difference, because I used to be a fundamentalist, right? What happened? Was I so open-minded? Well, I don't think I was particularly open-minded. And yet I tumbled out of that faith. What happened is some reasons and arguments came along that undermined that very, very, very high level of confidence that I had. And I came to entertain the possibility that it was wrong, and I eventually came to believe that it was wrong. And so while it's true, I think that before belief revision actually happens, you have to entertain the idea that you could be mistaken. One of the things you can be mistaken about is that your beliefs should not be subject to revision, or that a specific belief shouldn't be subject to revision. But even a person who believes that can come to revise that. In other words, people can be mistaken when they say, I could never have my mind changed about that. In fact, one of the things I think that happens in these conversations too often is a person will be arguing with another person, and one of the person will say, look, you're wasting your time. Nothing's ever going to change my mind. You're never going to change my mind, okay? And then the first person goes, oh, okay, well, that's it then. But I think that's a mistake. I don't think that that's true. I think that when people are saying things like, nothing's ever going to change my mind, really what they're saying is, I don't want to have this argument, right? And we're sort of playing into that, into their hands when we say, oh, okay, then fine, and we're leaving them alone. I don't actually take people at their word when they say nothing could change my mind. That is, I think that they believe that nothing could change their mind, but I don't think that it's true that nothing could change their mind, because people who say things like that routinely do change their mind. Practically everyone who's ever believed in something and was convinced that they couldn't change their mind ended up changing their mind. Well, all of them had to have been wrong about that, right? So clearly a willingness, or rather clearly an unwillingness to change your mind, doesn't guarantee that you can't have your mind changed. In other words, I don't think a willingness to change your mind is a permissive condition for changing your mind. And that's because I don't think we decide our beliefs at all.
Yeah, I mean,
right? And so I don't think I don't even decide whether I'm going to be willing to change my mind. That's, what I think of my beliefs and whether I should revise them. I don't think that's up to me either. I think I believe that helplessly as well. So that's my reason why for thinking that it's not a volitional act, right?
It seems at that point in time, what you describe as open-mindedness is just anybody's capacity to just change their mind on anything, regardless of what it is. I think that open-mindedness is more of a attitude than anything else. If we would simply say that open-mindedness is the capacity of any person to be able to have a shift in the belief that they do have, well, I mean, then everybody technically is open-minded. But I think that when we use the term open-mindedness, it's more direct. It refers to more of an attitude that a person has, and rather than just the capacity that somebody has to change their mind at any time.
Okay, I think we're converging on the same point here. You might have missed it at the beginning when I said that I think that that just changing your mind doesn't mean a thing. A person who changes his or her mind willy-nilly, irrespective of good reasons and evidence, is not someone we go around saying, oh, how very open-minded. Oh, look, we don't compliment those people as being open-minded. We think that those people are just kind of capricious and stupid. They change their minds on a whim, right? We do not, compliment them by saying they're open-minded, right? Rather, I think that we reserve that compliment when we think a person, at least by our lights, has changed his or her minds in the face of good reasons and evidence. Not just that they change their mind. So everyone has a capacity to change their minds, but I think that we reserve the term open and closed-minded based on, by our lights, what occasions their change of mind. Are they changing their mind in the face of good reasons and evidence as a result of that, or not? If they are, then we say that they're open-minded. And if they're not changing their mind on that basis, right? If they're consulting a magic 8-ball, right? Then we tend to not compliment them by saying that they're open-minded, right? On the contrary, we might just think that they're kind of, whimsical and, flip and glib about their beliefs. And similarly, I think that when a person has held a belief for a long, long time, perhaps never changed their mind about it, but they have excellent reasons for it, we don't say that they're closed-minded just because they've never changed their minds, because by our lights, they have every good reason in the world for maintaining that belief. Why would they abandon it, right? So I agree with you that there's an attitude here, but what you're calling the attitude is what I was calling the amenability to reasons and evidence, right? The capacity to change your minds as a consequence of good reasons and evidence. That's how I see it.
See, here's the thing: you're not going to change my mind on this, okay? Is that all right?
I see what you did there.
I know. Sorry. I think the last point that I would put forward to it, just under what open-mindedness would be when you say that somebody holds positions for really good reasons, so they're not going to change their mind on that. And I think that's true. Yeah, obviously, if someone has believes something, especially if it's true, and they have good reasons to believe it's true, it doesn't mean that they're closed-minded. I think that the open-mindedness can still apply in that situation, that they understand what they believe as well as what would falsify that belief. They have enough of an understanding of the reasons why they believe that they would know in what needs to be presented to them in order for them to shift their belief. And I think that in that case, even if they have a belief that coincides with a true state of affairs, then they can still be considered open-minded as long as they understand what the falsification for such a belief would be.
Well, I think everyone. I mean, that is a desideratum. I think that is a desirable quality in anybody, that they know the reasons for their positions and are aware of some reasons against their position, right? I mean, that's a good thing. But I think that might be too strict a condition on open-mindedness, because I think a person can hold a position, have good reasons for thinking that, be unaware of good objections to their position. But if they are able, in response to those objections, change their mind, and I don't mean in the moment. I mean, it takes time for reason to work its magic, and good reasons and good evidence it works like a corrosive acid. It takes time. You shouldn't expect or demand that a person change their mind in the heat of the moment, right? That's a bit unrealistic. But if a person is able to have their mind changed for those reasons, then great. And then I think we would say they're open-minded. But the fact that they didn't beforehand know what some of those objections were to their position, because they just happened to be ignorant of them, doesn't undermine their open-mindedness. Because as I see it, provided that they have that capacity such that if they hear such good arguments against the position, they're able to go away and think about it and say, you know what, yeah, that undermined my confidence. I am no longer so confident about that. In fact, I've changed my mind about it, right? Then I would say that they're open-minded. But I think it would be too strict a condition on open-mindedness to insist that a person be able to articulate all good arguments against their own position. Very often we don't have good arguments against our own position. Very often we believe something because we've heard what we take to be a good reason or a good piece of evidence for thinking something is true, and we're not aware of any good objection, and so we believe it. And I don't think that makes you closed-minded. It would be closed-minded if, in the face of good arguments and evidence against it, you still clung to it against all reason, right? Then I think that would be an indicator of a measure of how closed-minded you are on that question. Oh, and I should perhaps say that I think that open-mindedness and closed-mindedness, I think, can be compartmentalized. A person can be open-minded on one question and closed-minded on another, simply because on some questions, you might think that the matter is closed, that you've thought about it sufficiently, and the evidence is so strong and so overwhelming that you're never going to change your mind, and so you're not willing. Whereas on some questions that are of no consequence to you, you can say, yeah, I'm perfectly willing to have my mind changed on that, in the sense that it would take nothing. It would just take like a feather to knock you over and make you change your mind on it. Whereas on another thing, it might take quite a lot. But I think that for a person to be genuinely open-minded, to say that as a kind of global property about the person's psychology, about their personality, is to credit them with a capacity to revise their beliefs in accordance with the norms of reason. And I think that's what we're doing when we're telling a person that they're open-minded, and we're accusing them of the opposite when we call them closed-minded. It shouldn't just be a measure of how often they change their minds, because I know people who change their minds all the time, and I don't think anyone thinks that they're particularly rational, and no one thinks that they're open-minded. In fact, I know a lot of people who are extremely closed-minded, who change their beliefs all the time, and they're closed-minded precisely because good reasons never seem to enter into how they change their beliefs. So that when they have a belief and you say to them, well, what about this and what about this, and you marshal all kinds of great arguments and evidence against them, they still hold to the belief, even though tomorrow they might change that belief. They might revise that belief for the dumbest of reasons, right? We would still be right to say, well, that person is really closed-minded, right? In other words, open and closed-mindedness, I think, is what we're doing there is we're diagnosing the kind of criteria that a person uses for belief revision, and it comes down to rational criteria. Are they using rational criteria? Are they being reasonable?
I think
oh, go ahead.
I think that's one of the points brought up there, and I'm not sure if this kind of moves into a different way that we'll probably get to eventually, but that challenge to people, or that use of closed-mindedness is a pejorative when you're discussing something with somebody, when really you're just using closed-mindedness to describe anybody that doesn't share your position on something. Like you might be you might think that your position is strong, and you might believe that you've presented in such a way that everybody should agree with you, and then from that point, when people don't agree with you, then all of a sudden it becomes, well, you're just being closed-minded. In that sense, we just use it as a pejorative, when really it's challenge can be levied back on that person for not fully understanding why this person is rejecting these ideas.
Well, we can certainly be mistaken in our attributions of open and closed-mindedness, right? So, for instance, if I have crappy critical faculties, if I have never studied critical thinking, and I haven't had good models of critical thinking around me, if I don't have good epistemic norms, right, to apply, I have really bad ones, but I take them to be good. I'm still going to go around calling people open and closed-minded, but I think I'm going to be misfiring all over the place. I'm going to be misidentifying who is really open and closed-minded, right? I mean, think of a conspiracy theorist, for instance, who has taken on board as an epistemic principle that counter evidence against their position is actually further evidence of the efficacy of the conspiracy, right?
Yeah, you find this all the time with flat earthers, where their mind's so open, they're woke, but and every other person that disagrees with them is obviously at that point in time closed-minded.
They're just sheeple, really.
Yeah, they're
right.
sheeple.
Now by their light, because of the epistemic principle that they've taken on board, namely that counter evidence is further evidence, further confirmation of the conspiracy. As soon as you hit them with a good argument, they think you're closed-minded because they think you're operating on lousy epistemological principles. They think you're being irrational, right? So the attribution of open and closed-mindedness is always, I think, offered from the standpoint of whether or not a person is changing their minds according to the lights of reason. But people can be mistaken about what is a good epistemological principle, right? That doesn't mean that there's no there about what is a good epistemological principle, but I think at bottom, when people are complimenting and insulting each other with these expressions, it's because what they're trying to sort of get at is on what basis is belief revision happening? Is it happening in accordance with good reasons and evidence, or not? Is that what is occasioning the belief revision? And that's why I think that actually skepticism. Part of the question that I wanted to ask was, can a skeptic be open-minded? And well, it depends what you mean by skepticism. If by skepticism you just mean someone willy-nilly goes around doubting everything, then I don't think that that's relevant at all, because I think doubt is just a feeling. It's just an attitude that you have, right? It's the opposite of certainty, right? You have certainty is maximal confidence, and doubt happens just as cheaply. You can feel certain about things that you have no business being certain of, and you can doubt things that you have no reason to doubt, no good reason to doubt. You can have poorly motivated doubts. I think that doubts have to be warranted, just like confidence and certainty has to be warranted. But if by skepticism you mean something like having an understanding of what goes into that toolkit of critical thinking tools, right? Then yes, skepticism. Then yes, of course, a skeptic can be open-minded. In fact, I would skepticism defined that way, as possessing this critical thinking toolkit. Then yes, I would think that is absolutely an ingredient. Indeed, it's a requirement of being open-minded, is that you be skeptical in that sense. But it doesn't mean that you just doubt. I don't think skepticism is doubt. I think skepticism is actually the application of critical thinking tools. It is investigation. It is interrogation. It's not doubt. Doubt's just a feeling. It doesn't count for anything. Doubts arise as helplessly as the feeling of certainty. If you say something to me now that strikes me as manifestly true in light of what I already believe, I will just take it on board and go, yeah, that makes perfect sense, and I'll be confident about it. But if you say something that strikes me as preposterous in light of what I believe, then you'll notice that I will immediately doubt it. doubt just bubbles up for free. It takes no will, no volition, no mental act on my part. It just happens. I just emit doubts just like I emit feelings of confidence about things. So doubt, I think, is no part of skepticism. It's no part of critical thinking. But I think critical thinking tools, possessing them, understanding them, knowing when they apply and when they don't apply and how to apply them, and having trained yourself to try to revise your beliefs in accordance to that, such that that becomes a kind of mental habit, a habit of mind. That's what we mean by genuine skepticism and genuine open-mindedness. So I think skepticism and open-mindedness go hand in hand. You can almost use the terms interchangeably, the way I understand open-mindedness and the way I understand skepticism.
Because recently I've noticed on the the Great Debate community, little G+ there, there's a lot of criticisms that theists level against people who are either atheists or just identify as skeptics, which would be they're not open-minded to hearing evidence contrary to their personal belief, whether it's agnostic or atheist. And if they're using open-mindedness as a way to say, hey, you're not listening to the evidence, I think that would make, I would understand that. I do see that as a common thread among some atheists in the community, that they simply shoot down arguments and things that would at least constitute as evidence. But at that point, would a skeptic be considered closed-minded because they just dismiss theistic beliefs, right? Would that even be part of it, or?
Well, I don't think you're being open-minded or particularly skeptical if you're being dismissive, if you're prejudging something. I mean, it's okay to say, listen, I have no time for that argument. I think it's ridiculous, but presumably you should have reasons for that. If your reason for thinking that an argument is a bad one because it leads to a conclusion you don't like, that's just prejudicial. You shouldn't be dismissing an argument for that reason. You should dismiss an argument because there's a good reason, there's a good counter to it or something like that.
But isn't there a kind of Morean option that would validate that kind of move?
I don't know what you mean by a Morean. I mean, I presume you mean G.E. Moore, but I don't know what you're referring to.
Well, just the idea. I'm thinking about what's called Moore shifting, which is connected to the Moore's argument against skepticism, where he shows up his hand. So my idea is that, take a theist, for example. It seems to me possible that somebody could believe in God and say that their confidence in the existence of that God is greater than the premises of any argument that would be given to disprove the existence of that God, or even cast doubt on it, right? And I don't think that would be irrational.
I agree. I mean, if a person has reasons for believing in a God, and they think that well,
I don't think it would have to have reasons.
Oh,
I think it could be held irrationally, but I think they could say that their confidence in the belief is greater than their confidence in any premise that would be part of an argument to cast doubt upon that belief.
Right. Okay. So they have, let's say, an unwarranted belief in the existence of God, but however unwarranted that is, they find that the argument, the premises in an argument against their God, let's say, is actually more dubious than their unwarranted belief in a God. But that seems to be slicing the bologna a little thin by my lights, because if a person avowedly has an unwarranted belief, then I don't know why they have any degree of confidence in it. They might, in other words, the argument against their position might be even less warranted.
Well, it's the idea is that it's foundational.
Okay.
It's foundational to their belief system. So it seems to me that if it's foundational, right, it's going to be the light by which you judge arguments.
Right. But that's fine. That person I wouldn't judge to be closed-minded in such an instance, because
okay, no, I'm glad we agree about that. It's just that I've sort of presented this to various atheists, and there's usually a lot of discomfort with this idea.
Yeah, well, I think that discomfort might stem from they don't like the conclusion, and
yeah, well, I'm uncomfortable with it too, but I just don't see a way I could call that person irrational, really.
Yeah, well, I think irrationality is one of those things in the great debate that gets tossed around incorrectly. Like, a lot of people will just say, if you come to a conclusion that is, by my light, false, then it's irrational. People believe that certain conclusions are irrational, and it seems to me that a conclusion can't be irrational, right? We can say of an argument that it's irrational. I mean, whether or not a position is rational or irrational depends on how you got there, right? And to say that something is irrational means that you violated some epistemic norm, right? But a lot of people just sort of jump to the conclusion. They say, well, the conclusion is false, therefore there can't be a good argument for it, which is, I think, ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I just go ahead.
Although you actually hold to some positions where I think we would disagree, because I don't understand non-inferential justification. I don't understand how it's. I think you have a view like that, and I think you also defend some kind of externalist epistemology, and that's not a view that I can understand.
Yeah, I'm an externalist, and I mean, I don't want to. This isn't really the place for that, but yeah, I'm an externalist, and but
I'd like to try to dissuade.
When I talk about what's that?
I'd like to try to dissuade you from externalism and epistemology.
Are you open-minded to being dissuaded now, Ozzy?
I'm not willing to have my mind changed. Actually, that's a perfect case in point. Actually, like, supposing I were to say, well, I'm unwilling to have my mind changed, right? If I said I was unwilling to have my mind changed, what that would mean, literally right now, is that would literally be the truth. I'm not willing to have my mind changed about that. Why would I be willing to change my mind about what I take to be a true belief? I'm not, right? It's when a person says I'm willing to change my mind, it's really a figure of speech. It's just another way of saying, okay, I'll hear you out, right? But I don't think anyone's really willing to change their mind unless about something they actually take to be true. I mean, if I'm on the fence about it or something like that.
Well, it's interesting that I think it was Rousseau who said that and he took this to be a good thing, was that belief change is actually coercive. Because he said that, if somebody gives you an argument, or if somebody gives you a good argument or good evidence to show you that a belief you hold is false, you're actually coerced. You're actually coerced into the new belief.
Yeah,
and he took that to be a good thing. Like, that was a case of coercion. That was a case of coercion he approved of.
Yeah, well, I mean, rational persuasion, I think, is a form of psychological coercion. You actually, but that's only if the person values reason. But if they value reason and you are applying reason, you can actually sort of crowbar a person into changing their mind, right?
Well, I don't think we could attribute agency or mentality to someone who didn't value reason at all, right? I think it's partly constitutive of agency, I think, to value reason.
I don't know that it is, but I know that for the purposes, I believe that for the purposes of the description of content.
At least that there's a Davidsonian argument to.
Yeah, I think for the purposes of the ascription of mental content and intentionality in the first place, you have to assume rationality, right?
But wouldn't we just say that person wasn't an agent if they were purely irrational? Would we even attribute thoughts to them at all?
Well, no, I think we would just not understand what. I think we would throw up our hands, right? I mean, that we we believe that.
Well, but I mean, don't you think? I mean, don't you think that intentional?
Right?
Don't you think that intentional states are constitutively normative? I'm not talking about. So when I say thoughts, I'm not talking about sensations, because I think there could be. I think there could be sensations without rationality. But I take beliefs and desires to be constitutively normative, and so I think if there was total irrationality, there wouldn't actually be intentionality.
No, I agree with that, because I also think that intentionality is normative. It's a normative concept, right? I mean, it's a problem.
Yeah. Okay. So then we agree. We agree after all.
Yeah. No, I think we do agree on that. But what I don't agree, though, is that we would assume. I don't think it follows from that fact that a person who was just absolutely recalcitrantly irrational would be denied agency. I think we would just.
No, I meant total irrationality. Obviously, a person can be irrational.
Totally irrational.
Yeah, I meant a person.
Yeah.
A person can be irrational. I think what we mean by that, though, is that they're irrational about certain things, right? But if somebody was irrational about everything, I don't think that we would consider them to even have a mind.
Yeah, no, I mean, this would be like the worst kind of autism, where we would simply not be able to ascribe. I mean, if that were the case, for a person to be completely irrational means we could never connect their behavior with what's happening around them. We would not be able to predict from one moment to the next what they were going to do. We wouldn't predict that if you flashed a light in their face that they would wince and blink their eyes or something like that.
Right,
but
and so I think
what you and I are talking about here by total irrationality is total irrationality. That like the complete
something like Darwin's deity.
Nice.
Nice little slip in there. I saw that.
Yeah.
Nice thing.
But before we continue down this, I didn't want to stop you guys. I'm actually quite interested, but just to
I think we agree. We agree, so we don't have to argue about that anymore.
We're all open-minded in this hangout, I'd like to think. So, there was actually a question that I was thinking about that was asked to me, and I thought it'd be interesting to posit. So, how effective is like a street epistemology type of approach at coercing someone? What do you guys think?
I think that it's a good door opener, depending on what the culture is. There's certain people that are so saturated within their like religious communities or religious culture that they might not have a lot of exposure to people that don't share the same type of viewpoints as they do. And if that's the case, I think that it is effective in at least kind of opening the door and letting people know that there are actually other views out there that people do hold. So people that might have already not necessarily their own doubt on something, but that they might have had questions about their own beliefs sometime in the past, but have just kind of gone along with the norm, can at least now be willing to evaluate them again.
Street epistemology is actually kind of an interesting thing. I'm in sort of dialogue with Anthony Magnavosco, who's one of these people who uploads videos of himself having conversations with people, asking them about some profound belief that they have, some consequential belief that they have that they feel confident of, and then he just asks them questions, and he's not he's not in your face, and he's not in no way is there any kind of obvious effort to subvert their belief, but clearly the questions are aimed at getting the person to reconsider whether or not they have any good reasons for their beliefs, right? And so often things boil down to, well, you got to have faith, man. And this is something I was not very familiar with. I'd heard of street epistemology, but I'm in dialogue with him now, and I may be having a conversation sometime soon about this stuff. But I've actually been really interested, in fact, fascinated, watching hour after hour of these videos of just ordinary people on the street being accosted by a total stranger and being asked some rather pointed but polite questions about why they believe some belief. And it doesn't have to be about God, although it often is. Sometimes it's about their belief in ghosts or karma or something like that. And it's amazing how just questions raise doubts. Just asking the questions and the person feeling on the spot that they have to answer the question, you know, because these street epistemology exchanges invariably start off with, you know, okay, what is it you believe, and on a scale of 0 to 100%, how high or low would you rank your confidence? And you know, some people will start off at 100% or 90% or something like that. And then after the conversation, and conversation can go from 5 minutes to half an hour or longer, the person then, the street epistemologist then asks the subject, well, you know, how would you evaluate your confidence now? And very often it comes down, right? And there it is in real time. You're watching, you know, belief revision. You're not watching the person revise their belief, but you're watching a revision in their degree of commitment to their belief, right? At least they're willing to change their profession of their degree of commitment to their belief, right? And I think people are demonstrating open-mindedness in those moments. You're actually seeing that, and they're not even being faced with strong objections. Where usually the objections are merely questions that where there's an implied objection, right? And then the people are doing all the work, and I mean, and you see people who, if they were approached differently, those same people, if they were approached more aggressively, you just know the walls would go up and they would dig in their heels, and they would walk away feeling just as confident as they ever did before. In fact, it might even galvanize their resolve, and they might go off and you know, go try to think of reasons to preserve and maintain their existing belief. Whereas the street epistemology, I've changed my mind about it. I have to say, I had some prejudicial views about it, and after watching a bunch of these videos, I now see the efficacy of this approach, and how corrosive simple, polite interrogation is in getting a person to reevaluate. I'm really quite impressed with it.
Yeah, I only watched a few videos. Oh, Ozzy, you're echoing. I only found a few videos that recently that actually were quite cool to watch. And I just thought how interesting that could apply to our community, because in a way, we have certain people, and I know internet street epistemology is not necessarily the same thing, especially because there's so many people who are interested in those like gotcha questions, or you know, poning somebody else, like what we discussed off air. And I thought how interesting of an example it is to watch someone engage with another person in the way that just puts a little bit of doubt, just plants the seed. And just like how you said, logic, you know, will eventually erode like an acid at any foundational beliefs. You see that happening in real time. And I always wonder if we in the GDC take that approach more seriously when dealing with certain individuals who either, even if they're, you know, fundamentalists in a religious sense, or they're like, you know, militant atheists or something, how much more success probably isn't the right word, but how much more I want to say success, but how much more success we would have in having their beliefs change over time, as opposed to just an aggressive browbeating approach.
But it would never work in these communities, and especially in these online communities, because the street epistemology it works to kind of get people at when they're vulnerable. You know, they're not expecting this conversation to be happening, and like Ozzy said, they don't have you know, approach a different way. They put the defenses right up. People that are in this community start off, you know, already there. Their defenses are up. They have a position that they need to defend, that they have to argue for, and you're not going to get the same type of openness to that style of discourse in a community where people are coming here for the specific goal of arguing their position.
I think it's a lot harder. I think it can happen, and it does happen, but again, the approach has to be, you know, fairly gentle, and I think genuine. One of the reasons I think these street epistemology videos seem so effective, I think, is because there's a genuine exchange there. I mean, I've only watched 2 different individuals doing this kind of thing, but when they do it, it seems to me that although they have their own agenda, right? They are trying to sort of get a person to reevaluate and call what they believe into question. That's part of the sort of game that they're playing. But they seem genuinely interested in what the person is saying, and and all they do is ask questions. They don't actually challenge. They don't raise any objections, and it's amazing how effective that is. I was really impressed with it. I thought it was a sort of a more sort of devious and kind of underhanded way to try to get people to just abandon their belief or something like that. It was much more overt, because the street epistemology, this online movement was inspired by a book called A Manual for Creating Atheists by, oh dear, what's his name? I forgot his name. Is it Peter Boghossian? Is that it? Peter, Paul, something Boghossian, I think.
It's Peter, yeah. There's also a Paul Boghossian, but he's a philosopher.
Oh, right. Right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it is Peter Boghossian. I was expecting something different when I started watching these videos, but I was kind of delighted, because it sort of gives you some hope when you see people who are really, really wedded to these beliefs, and they are, professing tremendous confidence. Sometimes they start parroting out these apologetic moves that we've all heard before, but because they're being approached the right way, I don't know, the shields don't just go up in the same way. It's remarkably effective.
And that's what I liked about it, because there's a few instances in the great debate community where I can think of where that's actually happened. You've seen the shields just not even raised, right? It's just perfect. It's not a perfect conversation necessarily, but it's a genuine one where the person isn't being confrontational, not necessarily argumentative, and you see what people the kind of logic, the train of thought that they go through, and slowly over time, it doesn't happen in that hangout usually. Me being a lurker before I actually became a participant in the GDC, I noticed that over time people's approach would change, or what people would believe would change after one hangout, where either they were having a genuine conversation or there was an objection that was raised that they really didn't have an answer to, right? And they weren't simply on the defensive. It was a genuine objection. Hey, you really need to answer this. And I always, it's one of those things I wish would happen more often. I understand what Saka was saying in this community. It is more about, I want to argue my position. I just, I want to raise my own standards of how well I can argue. But I think that people would benefit more from a genuine conversation, even people that they find to be incorrigible or fundamentalist in some sort of way. Because there's been a few examples where, someone I know had changed their mind about vaccines causing autism. And after, I don't know, a month or two of having conversation over it, they now are at a position where they say, I don't believe they cause autism anymore. I have concerns over them, whether, children who are so young taking so many vaccines close together. But I don't believe such an extraordinary conspiracy like that they cause such a harmful issue. So, well, whether people are actually going to take up that approach, who knows? But it would be something interesting to see the GDC slowly shift towards. And I actually had a very good point to make, and I completely forgot it because.
Well, if I could just sort of cap off, I have to leave in a moment, but one thing that troubles me is very often I see this weird little dynamic happen when people are arguing a question. Happens a lot in the great debate, and then one person says, "I'm unwilling to have my mind changed," and the other person says, "Well, then that's it. There's no point in talking to you." And if there's one sort of take-home message from what I was trying to get across here this evening, it's that doesn't mean anything. I think that's just noise. I think the person who says, "I'm unwilling to change my mind," is being sincere when they say that. they think they're not going to have their mind changed. They think you're wasting your time, and consequently, they don't want to waste your time, and they don't want their time wasted. But I don't think that it follows that it is time wasted to sort of pursue the conversation. I don't think you should insist and force a person into a conversation. No one should. I mean, people should be left alone to have conversations when they're willing, not be sort of strong-armed into it, either implicitly or overtly or whatever. But I don't think it means anything when a person. I think it means. I don't think it's factual when they say I can't have my mind changed. I don't. And that's again because I don't think that open-mindedness consists of being willing to have your mind changed, or even a willingness to listen. Because all of us can think of something that we used to believe that we're now embarrassed that we ever believed. And chances are there was a time when we believed that so firmly that we thought nothing could change our mind. And we would have been telling the truth if we told a person, I'm not willing to have my mind changed about that. And one thing that we should guard against is this kind of feigned open-mindedness and feigned skepticism where a person pretends to entertain doubts when they don't, right? Where a person says, oh, I'm willing to change my mind about anything. Right? That's a lie. When people say that, they're lying, right? They're lying if they want to be construed literally, because I don't think that you will yourself to change your mind. Every time I have changed my mind, it has happened despite my will, against my will. Jack raised the paraphrase or a quote from Rousseau, that rational persuasion is a form of coercion. You are forcing a person to change his or her mind if they value reason, and you apply reason, and that has the effect of changing their mind. So I don't think we should sort of give up just because a person says, I'm unwilling to change my mind. I don't think that means anything. That's really just noise. And the sort of the odd dance that I see happening is a lot of people like to get into an argument and they're waiting for the person to say, look, you're wasting your time, you're not going to change my mind. And then the other person says, well, then there's no point. And they walk away feeling victorious, and they crow that they've won a victory. But I think it's a mistake. It's not a victory to get a person to admit they're unwilling to change their mind, because I don't think that bespeaks actual closed-mindedness. Anyway, so
this is actually a good time to end the hangout. But before I do that, does anyone want a few minutes to toss in their last 2 cents? Saka.
Yeah, I think the fundamental, there's just a term like open-mindedness or closed-mindedness. I feel that they are more accurately descriptions of attitudes that people have when they approach these discussions, and because of that, I think that I might just be closed-minded here, but there has to be a willingness in there. There has to be it has to be more of an attitude than anything else. But that's my view, and I understand that you can approach this and you can have definitions of open-mindedness or closed-mindedness that are a little more restrictive on what some other people might mean by these terms. But when I use it in conversation, that's just generally more or less what I associate it with.
Cool. Jack, Philip, you two, fight for the last 2 cents you want to give. Fight to the death.
Oh, I don't have anything to add right now.
Man, I was trying to get you guys to argue over each other. Killing me.
I don't have much to say. The only thing that I really had to say was about the Moorian thing, but Jack already brought that up. So
yeah, so you kind of were just chilling around, I guess. No worries. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this was informative, and if anybody has any questions or would like to direct any questions back to any of the panelists, the comment section is open for that. If there's any topics or anything you'd like to bring to my attention for next week, also feel free to put it in the comment section or bring it to a post I'll make at the GDC. And thank you guys so much for watching, and feel free to subscribe. Bye-bye.